Hi everybody and welcome to my channel. In this episode I'm going to be talking about what happens when somebody is murdered in prison. When someone is murdered by another prisoner. Now what normally happens if the prisoner is already serving a life sentence, then he goes on to murder somebody in prison. He will then most definitely be given life without parole. But I'll go on to talk about a couple of cases when someone has been murdered inside of prison, obviously by another prisoner, and I'll tell you the sentences that they received. Now, most of these murders that I've either documented on my channel or that I've read about, and it's normally in the high security prisons, and I'm just talking about the ones in England to start with, because the 5 high security prisons in England, which is Frankland, Wakefield, Whitemoor, Long Lartin and Full Sutton. Now these 5 prisons are the high security prisons which hold category A prisoners and the most dangerous prisoners in the country. Now the first one I'll talk about was in Frankland prison when 23-year-old Mitchell Harrison, a convicted sex offender from Cumbria, was murdered by 2 other inmates. So Mitchell Harrison, 23, originally of Wolverhampton, was serving an indefinite term for child rape in Cumbria when he was killed in October 2012. Michael Parr, 32, and Nathan Mann, 23, cut his neck with a scalpel made from plastic cutlery and a razor blade. Now, they both disemboweled him, pulled out his stomach, and they were planning on eating his liver. Well, Michael Parr had earlier pleaded guilty to murder and must serve a minimum of 32 years. He was already serving life for the attempted murder of a hospital patient. And Nathan Mann pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility and was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 16 years to run consecutively to the 24-year minimum sentence he is already serving for a double murder. So when a sentence runs consecutively, that means it goes on top of his already 24 years, which means he'll be serving a minimum of 40 years before he'll be eligible for parole. Now, another case I'll talk about, which everyone will have heard of, is Robert Maudsley. And Robert Maudsley is deemed so dangerous, he's living in an underground cell in Wakefield prison, and he's not allowed any contact with any other human. Now, Robert Maudsley was already serving a sentence for murder. Then when he was in Broadmoor Hospital, he killed another patient and he was transferred to HMP Wakefield, where he went on to kill another 2 inmates. I will not go into all the details of the Robert Maudsley case because I've already done a video on this previously, but I am going to be doing an updated one maybe next week and telling you all about Robert Maudsley. But for the 3 murders that he committed whilst in prison, he was sentenced to life without parole, meaning he will never be released from prison. And like I've mentioned, he's living in an underground cell in Wakefield prison with a perspex glass door so the prison officers can see his every move. Now, another murder that happened in prison was in HMP Long Lartin when Soban Anwar was serving life with a rec of 23 years for murdering his partner's child. Now, Gary Smith and Lee Newell took out their own prison justice and killed Soban Anwar. Now, Gary Smith and Lee Newell were both already serving life for murder. So when they went on to kill Soban Anwar in HMP Long Lartin, they went on to receive whole life sentences, meaning they will never be released from prison. But like I've mentioned, like all these cases have in common, it's normally on the sex offender wings where these murders are taking place. And it's either people that have killed children or committed sexual offences against children that are being murdered by the other inmates. But like I mentioned, if an inmate is already serving a life sentence and he goes on to murder again whilst in prison, he will receive life without parole. Another murder which happened in prison was at HMP Full Sutton. And another thing that all these cases have in common is they all happening in high security prisons, because this is where they're housing the most serious offenders. Now, the next case is Richard Huckle, who was jailed or serving a life sentence for multiple sexual offences against children. I've already done a video on this. If you flick through my previous videos, you will see the full story to it. But Richard Huckle was killed by fellow prisoner Paul Fitzgerald. Now, Paul Fitzgerald went on to torture and murder Huckle for quite some time, and he told him that he wanted him to feel what his victims felt whilst he was doing things to them. So Paul Fitzgerald was acting out in his head his own justice and thinking that this was what the paedophile deserved. So Paul Fitzgerald admitted this once he was in court and took great pleasure in telling the judge what he had done and saying that he was acting out his own justice. And for this, he received life with a minimum term of 34 years. Now, this other murder that I'm going to talk about that happened in prison was actually up in Scotland in HMP Glenoakhill. And I've done a video previously on this, and it's James Orrock, also known as Piggy, which is a fearsome man up in the Scottish prison systems. Everybody knows him and fears him in the Scottish prisons. And he's been in prison since 1992. Now, James Orrock had also previously tried to kill another inmate in HMP Glenoakhill, and he received another sentence for that. But then in 2021, he went on to kill fellow inmate Dean Ramsey. He went into the cell with Dean Ramsey and choked him to death. And for that, he received another 23 years on top of his sentence. But he was already serving a life sentence for murder. And all of the attacks that he's committed whilst in prison, which I've went into in my video, if you want to go back and look on previous videos. And he's doing quite a substantial sentence once you add them all up. And I think with this 23 years on top of his original sentences, he's serving around about a minimum of 40 years in prison. But the judge told him he will probably never be released from prison. So these are just some of the cases that I know about that murder has happened in prison. And the sentences that they're handed for killing people whilst in prison is either life without parole or a substantial life sentence on top of their existing sentence, meaning they will probably never be released from prison. So if an inmate kills another inmate in prison, the chances are they will never be released from prison. But I'll leave that one there for now, people. Hopefully you're enjoying the content. Remember to like and subscribe. Take care.